You can build a social networking site. With today's developer tools, it's surprisingly easy to build something as complex as a social network. Welcome to this new series, where we'll build this project from zero through an MVP stage, arriving at a final, real product with monitoring, hosting, DevOps, analytics, scaling, and everything else that is quintessential for a production application to survive in the real world. So, let's jump right into it. We are going to build this using Next.js, which is a React framework with great features and grade A tooling. We are going to be hosting everything on Vercel, which will enable us to have quick turnaround times and to scale infinitely. We can start building right now by running the create next step command, which will bootstrap everything for us. We'll be using TypeScript, which adds strong typing to JavaScript and makes writing reliable JS much easier. ESLint, which will enforce our code style. Tailwind CSS, which lets us style everything with utility classes, and the Next.js app router. We're going to leave everything else on default settings. Once that's done, we can pop open our IDE of choice, I'm using VS Code, and we can run the command npm run dev in the terminal. That's going to launch our dev server, and if we visit the URL it spits out, we can see the example page that create next step generated for us. Let's open src/app/page.tsx and get rid of most of this code. We're going to leave just the main tag with a couple of classes that set up a vertical flexbox that takes up the whole page. We can also put a paragraph in there to keep track of how our layout looks. If we look at our browser again, we can now see our hello world paragraph on the edge of the screen. By the way, all of this code is available on GitHub and it's all in the public domain. The link is in the description. The next file we want to take a look at is src/app/layout.tsx. This file specifies two things that apply to this index page and also all of its child pages: the metadata and the layout. The metadata specifies what kind of tags to put in the head of the generated HTML. This would be a title, a description, an image, and various open graph tags that we'll deal with later. For now, let's just change it to something more relevant than the default. The layout will wrap your page.tsx files with additional HTML. This root layout will universally apply to all pages, so you should put things in here that you'd have to include in all of your page.tsx files otherwise. The default things that are included are the HTML and body tags, which are absolutely required, but we are also going to put our navbar in here. So let's actually do that. Let's create a component subdirectory in our src folder. This will house reusable React components, and utilizing this will be key to keeping your structures sane. You should always refactor similar elements and code into a component. If you don't know how to do that yet, that's completely fine. We're going to be doing that as a part of this project. This will save you a lot of time when you're prototyping, and it will also save you a lot of sanity when you're debugging. Our first component will be our navbar, so let's create a tsx file for it. Inside this file, we'll specify our navbar component and also export it so that the rest of our codebase can use it. We'll be using a nav element to wrap everything up, which is a semantic HTML tag. Let's make it a flexbox so that our elements will lay out horizontally. Inside, we'll have an h1 tag specifying the name of our social media site, which for me is Rocks, and an unordered list of navigation links. We don't actually have anywhere to navigate to yet, so we'll do some styling later to make these look like actual links. If we take a look at our site in its current state, we can see that we need to do a lot more styling to make this layout properly. I find it useful to think of the logical structure of a component first, and then use styling to make it look nice. Let's add a border to the bottom of the nav to separate it from the rest of the site. We should make the h1 large and bold to emphasize our brand, and we also need to make the UL a flexbox to get it to lace items out horizontally. Let's add some vertical centering and use leading none on the heading so that the large default line height won't make our navbar any bigger than it needs to be. We should also add some gaps and padding to keep things looking spacious. The last touch is adding the justify between class to the nav element so that the heading will be on the left and the links will be on the right. Let's go back to the browser and it looks great. That is, until you try to click on a link. It's always a bit unnerving when you're expecting something to be interactive and it doesn't actually do anything. So let's fix that with some more styling. Because we're going to need to apply the same style to multiple elements, the two LIs in our navbar, now is a great time to create its own component. So let's create a navbar item component in the same file. There's no need to export this because we'll only be using this in the navbar. Let's take in the element's children as the props and return a list item tag with the children passed through. If you're not too familiar with React props, the children in this case would be the text inside our elements, so for example, sign in. After that, let's replace the list item tags in our navbar component with navbar item elements. If we look at our browser again, nothing has changed, and if we open the inspector, we can see that the resulting HTML is exactly the same as before. However, if we, for example, add classes to the list item tag in the navbar item component, our two navbar item elements will instantly gain those classes without having to specify them in each one. That is one of the many superpowers of React. So, let's style our navbar item. We're going to add some classes to the list item tag that use the hover modifier. In Tailwind CSS, if you prefix a utility class with hover:, it will only be applied if the cursor is hovering on that element. In this case, if the list item is being hovered, it will have a white background and black text. There are a bunch of other modifiers, and we're going to use them extensively in this project. Alongside these classes, we'll also add a cursor pointer to make it have the right cursor icon, and some horizontal padding to make the hover effect look prettier. If we open our browser again, these buttons immediately feel way better. So, now we have a blank canvas and we know how to paint, so let's make some paintings. I'm not going to be explaining every class and tag that I use from now on, because you should design your UIs the way you want it to look. I am going to talk about structure and intention though. If you need some help with the UI part anyway, you can peek at the code on GitHub. I edited my page's main tag to horizontally center everything because I was planning to drop my post elements straight into it. After that, I created a post component that would be reused to display every post on the platform. At first, I just made it a big white rectangle so that I could see how it laid out on the screen. I also added some code to the page that spawned 100 of these components, and I made their widths responsive with Tailwind's screen breakdown modifiers. This made sure that posts look somewhat sane on every screen size. After I locked down the big picture, I got rid of the chunky rectangles and started implementing the actual design of the post components. I wanted it to be made out of 3 sections: a header containing user and time info, the content of the post, and a footer with buttons to reply and share. I implemented the header with a little circle as a placeholder profile picture, and I also built the footer section with an unordered list of buttons, much like in the navbar. The design in my head was also the same as the button designs in the navbar, so I refactored the navbar item component into a separate list link item component so that it can be reused outside of the navbar as well. It got its own TSX file in the components folder, and I imported it into navbar and the post components. After I was happy with the layout, I realized that I've only been testing the design in dark mode, so I quickly switched to light mode. I had to fix some coloring issues by adding special cases with Tailwind's dark modifier. I also changed the background color that Create Next Step automatically gave us because it looked very odd. The next issue was that while our post component was very pretty now, it was also very dumb. All the text in it was hard-coded example text, which had to change if the site would actually work. I created a schema.ts file in the src folder, and I defined a type that would represent the post object in our database. We haven't actually connected a database yet, but I wanted to figure out what fields were needed and how the post component would use them to display a post. It ultimately came down to 3 fields: user, which for now would just be the name of the author of the post, content, which would be the text content of the post, and created at, which would be the timestamp of publishing the post. I defined these 3 properties, and I changed the post component to take an object of this type as a prop. After that, I went in and replaced the static example text with these dynamic inputs, and I also added the prop to where we create the post components on the index page to test that it actually works. So now we have a post component that is dynamic and an idea of what a post object would look like. It's time to store those in a database. We'll be setting up Vercel for hosting and storage in the next episode of this series, so subscribe and stay tuned. It will be coming out very soon. Building this project is a great exercise that will further your skills not only in programming, but also in making software projects work in the real world. So I really want to encourage you to follow along. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.